Out of the Abyss that's set in the Underdark. It's a mega adventure. It's a campaign. So my group has been continuing to survive, or in some cases not, the dangers of the Underdark. And they just escaped last session by the skin of their teeth, and one of their NPC party members did not escape, and another new dwarf they had met did not escape. Demogorgon rampaging through the Kuatoa village of Slubludop. And a lot of the Kuatoa didn't survive either. They just stopped, and Demogorgon rose out of the water all 30 feet high and started rampaging around like Godzilla or Cloverfield or something. And um, the Kuatoa just dropped to their knees and started basically worshiping him, and he was just crushing everybody. So anyway, they jumped into a couple of keel boats at the docks and pushed off into the dark lake and barely escaped by the skin. It was basically a scene from a disaster movie or a monster movie. They escaped by the skin of their teeth. And Shushar, the Kuatoa who had been with them and took them to Slubludop, saw that all was lost, and in despair realized that his people were lost and Demogorgon was rampaging. So he urged the party to leave, and he would go with them and help guide them because they would need a guide. And Sereth, the dark elf, died by a big tentacle crushed him. So that's where they were at. We picked right up at that point. I mean, they were still in the water, moving away from Slubludop, watching Demogorgon rampage. I was like, where do you want to go now? And they discussed, as you know, they're kind of rowing and talking, and they decided to go. After some discussion, they didn't know if they wanted to go to the deep gnome city of Blingdenstone, or if they wanted to go to Neverlight Grove. That was one of their possible destinations they've been talking about the entire adventure since they escaped Velkenvelv at the beginning of going to Neverlight Grove. One for sanctuary, and two because Stool, the Myconid sprout, little child Myconid that's with them, really wants to go home to Neverlight Grove. So after some discussion and asking, well, how far is the two different destinations? And Blingdenstone was actually slightly further, but not much. Actually, it was quicker to get to by a few days, but more overland travel. And they ended up deciding to go to Neverlight Grove. So and that's by the book, 24, 26 days or something like that. And one thing I was unable to determine by looking at the book, I'm sure the answer's in there if I would have dug deeper, but I didn't want to, you know, stop everything and go flipping through the books, was that I'm not sure if you're traveling by boat, if the distances between the locations in the Underdark are the same in the days. Because like if you're traveling at a fast pace or a medium pace or a slow pace, there's established, you know, from here to here is 20 days or whatever. I'm guessing it's the same by boat, or maybe it's slightly different. I don't know. Or maybe it just establishes, well, it's automatically a medium pace if you're by boat. I don't know. But anyway, I just kind of said, well, it's just standard travel time. So what I did was, instead of having an extended, because we've had a couple of sessions like this in this adventure campaign, where it was just a session or two of nothing but travel through the Underdark. We're camping, we're foraging, we're rolling for, you know, encounters, we're, you know, setting watches, all that stuff. And we've already established that. And we may do it again because this is a long enough mega adventure. It may be, you know, fun to do that again in the future. But I didn't want to do that to them again. So I said, guys, this is gonna be a narrative montage sequence. Um, you know, we're going to narrate the 20 days or 24 days or however long it takes you to get to, you know, where you need to go. And so I described, you said, you know, you're foraging, it's the Underdark, you're seeing beauty, you're barely escaping danger. I was describing terrain encounters that happen to them, you know, saying, hey, you're occasionally encountering creatures and threats. But we did it as a montage. I said, cue the music, see the montage. And I did that for the pace of the game because I didn't want to at this point stop and just have a session or two of, okay, well, you've stopped, you've taken a long rest, you're doing a short rest, you're battling, I just wanted to go ahead and get them towards Neverlight Grove. And I had already determined whether they go to wherever they went, as soon as they hit land, they were going to encounter the Oozing Temple, which is there's a section towards the beginning of Out of the Abyss book that it describes 4 or 5 set encounters that you can just determine they're going to have, and one of them is like a hook horror nest. Another one is um, a lost temple, and another one is the Oozing Temple, um, and then there's a couple of others. And the Oozing Temple is cool because it's a short dungeon crawl, uh, but it's also got some really neat features and a really interesting character. So I definitely wanted them to go into that. So they stopped. They hid their boats as best they could so they could find them again. They finally hit the shore after like 2 weeks of traveling. And they were, while they were in the boats, they were pulling over and camping at night and foraging. But they finally came to the end of the Dark Lake as far as they wanted to travel on the Dark Lake towards Neverlight Grove, which is Neverlight Grove is where basically the Myconids, the mushroom people, live. Stool wants to go there back to his family. He says there'll be safety there, which of course there won't be. One of the whole points of Out of the Abyss, nowhere's safe. Nowhere they go that they think is going to be safe is safe, because madness and demons and all. And I mean, the Underdark is inherently dangerous anyway, but it's even more dangerous now because demons and madness and all this stuff is going on. So, which I think is interesting. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it years and years and years, and that always to be D&D, but it's great for this campaign. And then of course you have the madness levels that, some of the characters got madness levels at the end of last adventure when they saw Demogorgon. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but yeah, you roll for madness when you see Demogorgon. So we've got, I think, one character now at madness level 2. We've got a few others at madness level 1. So before I go further on what happened in the Oozing Temple, a couple of sort of housekeeping notes, dungeon master notes. One, I have some family in town, and my cousin, through my wife's side, was like, "Hey, I wanna go play D&D." I was like, "Cool, go with me." And we got him there, and he's like, "Well, I'm just gonna watch." And I was like, "No, play, man. You'll have fun." And everyone's like, "Yeah, play." So he played, and I kind of made the decision for him. But I mean, if he really didn't want to play, I wasn't going to force him to. But anyway, so there's a couple of notes here I want to make on that. One, again, having Eldith, the dwarf NPC, I had one of my players fully developed Eldith, full character sheet and all that based on the notes on Eldith. And so Eldith is multi-purpose in this game. One is an NPC that if a couple of people don't show up that night, then I'll let somebody play Eldith to have another melee character. But if we have a full group and all that, then Eldith normally kind of hangs back. Two, well, let me collect my. So Eldith is helpful it continually proves useful as an NPC, both as an NPC and as a fill-in character when just somebody shows up and doesn't have the character. And my player creating that has been extremely helpful. So, two, another thing, my cousin was able to play last night, no problem, just eased right in. We said, "Hey, roll this, hey, do this, do that," and he already had some experience with D&D, just not 5th edition, but he was able to just pretty much jump right into it. So, it just reinforces, I think, 5th edition is a good edition. Now granted, we were telling him, "Hey, do this and do that and do that," but he got it. It wasn't radically different from what he had done before D&D wise, so he's able to get right in. So I thought that was good. Another thing, last video I mentioned that, I had a character or a player that basically suicided his character because he wanted to introduce a new character. And I had told him, "Okay, but you're not," he was like, "Oh, my character's dead," and pulled out a character sheet for another one. I said, "You're not introducing him tonight." And that kind of caught him off guard, and he ended up playing Eldith last week. So I shared with the group that, if somebody's character dies through natural gameplay, hey, they just took a hit, they weren't, it was too much for them, or any one of many number of things that can kill a character in D&D, hey, totally fine. We'll work in a replacement character as soon as possible. If it's obvious that you're suiciding your character, then I'm like, there's got to be some kind of drawback to that. So, because one, the method it was done last week really took away from the game and put complete attention on this character for like 30 minutes. And it was, in my opinion, very selfish, and it disrupted the storytelling and the gameplay. And, D&D it's a game. There's gameplay. It's, hey, let's roll dice, and there's hit points and this and that, and there's mechanics, but it's also cooperative storytelling. And, sort of a consensual, cooperative, shared experience. So the way it was done last week was very bothersome to me. And I don't like the idea of, well, I'm just going to suicide my character so I can have another one. Because everybody else and the DM has invested time into having that character as part of the party, has spent brain power on that character, all this stuff. And so I just don't want him dead. Yeah. So it just rubs me wrong. So I said, if it's absolutely obvious that somebody suicides their character, they can still keep coming to the game every week, but you can't introduce your new replacement character for 4 sessions. So either A, you'll have to play Eldith if Eldith is available for you, or you'll have to just sit and watch and just hang out. And I said I'm not going to do that to the player last week because that had not been established last week when he did what he did. But at this point moving forward, that's the rule. And so that way they're not kicked out of the group or anything like that, but there's a drawback. So, and that player did not show up last night. I don't know if it was because of what happened last week where I said, well, you can't introduce your new character. But sometimes they just don't show up. So they may be there next week. I don't know. Again, it's at a store, so people just kind of show up to the store. And, I'm not like close personal friends with a lot of the players. And, that's the only time I see them. And I have a lot of contact with several of the players I have no contact with outside of the game. So anyway, just a couple of housekeeping notes there. So, and another thing before I go into the temple and why I thought it was neat. One of my players, he's very creative. He continually proves himself to be creative. He's got a lot of history with D&D and fantasy games and stuff. And Sereth had died at the end of last session from Demogorgon just splatted him with a tentacle. So I had a character who handed me the sheet, and it had elven funeral practices, and then there was a song, an elven song he had written to sing for Sereth. So they actually did this stuff where like they braided their hair, and there was a ritual like when and depending on if it was a family member or a friend, it was which side of the head the braid would be on. And then after the ceremony is over, half of the braid is cut off and laid on the grave. In this case, there's no grave, but I guess they just symbolically laid it somewhere. And then they sang this song in Elven, the song of the wayward child, to Neverlight Grove, I guess an Elven deity. And I was impressed with it. It was very creative. I said, if you people could understand Elven, this is what you would hear. And I actually read the poetry out. So I thought that was really cool. And he's done other cool stuff before, like just really creative stuff, like with his vicious mockery. He's got all these prepared insults, and he's done other poetry and stuff before, and has interesting backstory on his characters. So I said, okay, we'll take 100 experience points. I just awarded him experience points. So I thought that was neat. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but another thing we've started doing in the game, I mentioned quite a while back, I got this idea from somebody else. At the beginning of each session, I have everybody that was there the week before roll a d20. Whoever rolls the lowest recaps what happened last time. And what I started doing, because some people, and I may have mentioned this before in one of the previous videos, so if I have, I apologize, but I'm not sure if I have. Some of the players will just be like, well, this happened, blah, 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 and they barely say anything. And then others will really give a good recap, and then others will be like, I just wasn't paying attention, or I don't remember, or whatever. So to help encourage, because the whole point of that is to help encourage people to pay attention and remember, because they may be called upon to recap. But the other thing is, I've introduced, depending on how well I subjectively, I'm the decider. Sounds like Bush. I'm the decider. Um, how well I think they did, they get anywhere from 0 to 100 experience points. And so far, I've given out like 50 experience points a few times and 75 once. So, they've got to really do a stellar job of recounting to get 100 experience points out of that. But anyway, okay, so to the temple. Basically, what happens is a cave-in traps the characters while they're walking through the Underdark, not in the water, they're actually back on land, and also opens up an entrance into this old temple. And part of the temple, or part of the area, is more like a natural cavern, and part of it is actually a structured, built out, hard at right angles and passageways temple. And it's basically full of like oozes, like gray oozes and black puddings and stuff like that. And to make it even more interesting, um, due to the cave-in, they're in there. Their air supply is limited, and there's water pouring in, and every hour the water is going up a foot. And I think the maximum is like 10 feet. So they got 10 hours to get out of this thing. And their air's running, depending on how many characters. I think they have 20 hours of air, I think. And if they really exert themselves, the air goes down quicker. So I love that dynamic. And I had to keep, I kept telling them the air seems really thin and stale. And I kept trying to hint thin, and they were getting that it was stale. It's like, oh, nobody's been in here for a while. And then finally, after several kind of hints, and I think somebody was doing like a nature check and all this stuff, and I finally went, it feels like that the air is really thin and getting worse. And they look, oh, we're running out of air. And then over time, I was like, oh, you're splishing through water. They're like, was that water there before? I'm like, well, you can't really remember. It's just kind of a thin layer of water. And then, it's like, now there's, there seems to be a couple of inches of water. And then finally they got the point, oh, the water's rising. And in order to finally get out of this thing, there's an area where they're the only way out of here. And it's weird because this temple doesn't have any other exits. I don't know if they just forgot to imply that it had a real exit at one point or what. Or maybe the cave-in changed it or something. I don't know. But the only way out is the cavern, the room or the cavern where the water is pouring in because the earthquake did some cracks and water is pouring in. The only way out is to crash through that and swim 30 feet up to the surface. So while they're like, well, you got to figure out how to get out of here, and they're searching every nook and cranny, the only way out is to smash through some rock and let more water in and swim up. So this is going to be interesting. And there's some traps with black puddings, and there's rooms with gray oozes. I really like this little mini side adventure. I purposefully wanted them to do this. But the real reason I wanted them to do it, because there's a fascinating character in here you may have already heard of called Glabagul. And it's a sentient gelatinous cube. And, it's Chris Perkins, the designer, winking at us and having some fun. And remember, the Underdark is sort of inspired by Alice in Wonderland. So there's all these whimsical, quirky, strange things going on, in addition to just the Underdark being weird. So, the Glabagul is fascinating. He's not out to kill anybody. He's just very curious. He speaks with telepathy. This temple was a temple to, I think, Jubilex, if I remember right, which is like this sort of fungus demon lord thing. And anyway, due to the Demon Lord's influence coming into the Underdark very strongly, Glabagul woke up and gave himself the name Glabagul. But he's very kind of a blank slate, very... in fact, I made it so he had woken up not that long before the character showed up. And he's just kind of hanging out. Hey, what's going on, And had a lot of fun with Glabagul. Had some fun with the characters seeing, like... a drow skeleton and a mace and some coins. Like, you could see there's something quite not right about it, and you can't put your finger on it. They were doing perception checks, and they couldn't figure it out. And the thing was, the stuff was floating, right? Because then they hadn't realized it was a gelatinous cube yet. They just saw the stuff floating, and they finally, oh, so why is it? That's weird. It's floating. And then they were able to, because the voice of Glabagul, who's telepathic, started talking to them before they realized there was a gelatinous cube in front of them. So one character finally, I think, rolled enough perception. He went, gelatinous cube. And of course, in a dungeon, gelatinous cube is a major danger. So the wizard, this character player always plays impetuous type characters, like I magic missile, and everyone's like no, because everybody else is getting the point that this gelatinous cube is talking to them telepathically and doesn't seem to be a threat. And it just so worked out that we determined by rules we had already set in place about marching order, because it was all single file and where this person was at, that they could not actually see the gelatinous cube. So if you can't see something, you can't target with magic missiles. So, which was cool because I didn't want them wasting Glabagool or getting into a fight with Glabagool. But anyway, so long story short, they end up kind of, establishing a rapport with Glabagool. He goes with them. They fought a couple of gray oozes. They're explaining, he's like, why I sense these other things that are like me but not like me, and they don't seem to talk back and all this stuff. So the characters are kind of explaining things to Glabagool, and Glabagool witnesses a fight between the characters in a gray ooze and is like, what? I don't understand. So they have to explain the concept of it attacked us first and self-defense and all this. So that was really kind of really good role play. And then also we had, they were doing some exploration, and where we ended it last night was they discovered the chamber where the water's pouring in, but I don't think they realized yet at all that's how we get out. In fact, they're like, how do we block that chamber so more water doesn't come in? That's the way they're thinking. And then also there's these 4 hallways that have traps in them that if you fall through, you fall into black puddings. So that's exactly where they're at. I really recommend doing this set encounter if you're going to do, let me get the exact name of it, make sure I'm using the right name. If you're going to do Out of the Abyss, like I said, there's these set encounters, and I absolutely 100% recommend, the Oozing Temple. In it, it's a tremor causes cave in and traps the adventurers in a maze of tunnels with no obvious way out. With a dwindling air supply and water rising in the tunnels, the characters are forced to find the means of escape. Complicating matters, part of the maze belongs to a forgotten temple that now serves as the lair of servants of the demon lord Jublex. So really, really cool thing. I totally recommend it. I think it's a really neat encounter in Out of the Abyss. And like I said, even if you're not running Out of the Abyss, I would lift it out and drop it into something else. I think it's just a fun little encounter. So anyway, that's how things are going. I appreciate any questions or comments that you may have. Please, if you're watching this video, well, obviously you're watching this video if you're watching this video and hearing this, but please leave it a thumbs up, a like on YouTube, and maybe a comment. That helps me out a lot. And we will catch you next time on Shane Plays. Thanks so much.